Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm Maria Yagoda, Senior Drinks Editor here at Wine Enthusiast. The recent announcement of the first ever American Pope, Leo XIV, still has the whole world buzzing. While his hometown of Chicago has a distinct wine and spirits culture of its own, so much so that Google searches for Malört, that bitter herbal liqueur, have skyrocketed. His move to Vatican City lands him in the center of the biggest wine scene no one's ever heard of. Vatican City, the city-state surrounded by Rome, Italy, is the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church and home base of the Pope. The Holy See has a population of a little under 900, making it the smallest sovereign state in the world both by area and by population. The city-state is known for many things: St. Peter's Basilica, the Sistine Chapel, the Vatican Museum, but it's not really known for wine, and yet it is the biggest wine importer per capita in the world. How much could the Pope and his staff possibly be drinking? Of course, there are plenty of people drinking in Vatican City besides papal employees, but unlike leaders in many of the world's religions, popes are allowed to drink and have for centuries. The prestigious French red wine Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which literally means New Castle of the Pope, has its roots in the 14th century Avignon papacy, when the Pope lived in France. Pope John XXII encouraged winemaking in the Rhone region and served the coveted Vin du Pape to foreign ambassadors and courts, spreading it around the world. The late Pope Francis even enjoyed wine in moderation, and has referred to wine as a gift from God to Vatican leaders, also stating, "Wine, land, agricultural skills, and entrepreneurialism are gifts from God. The Creator has entrusted them to us because, with our sensitivity and honesty, we make them a true source of joy." Now that Pope Leo XIV has moved to the Vatican, he joins a growing, quietly influential wine ecosystem. While it's only less than a half a square kilometer, the Vatican City has plenty of use for wine beyond just the sacramental ones poured at the altar. And it's just started making some wine itself for the first time in Vatican history. We invited James Bayley, news and website editor at The Drinks Business, onto the podcast to discuss his recent deep dive into how the Vatican became the world's most surprising wine powerhouse and how the new pope might fit into it. Thanks so much for coming on, James. It's a pleasure to meet you and have you here to talk about the Vatican City wine scene, which is not something that a lot of people think about when they think about the Vatican City. But I would love to hear from you the research that you've done on how the Vatican City became the top importer of wine per capita in the world. It's pretty wild to me, personally.
It is quite absurd at first. I mean, we're talking about the Vatican City, so a sovereign state tucked into the middle of Rome with a population of 800 people, which is less than the tiny village I grew up in Leicestershire. So they consume more wine per capita than anywhere else in the world. That's the sort of grabby headline, and it looks like a great headline, but it doesn't quite tell the story. Depending on the year, I mean, we're talking about 99 bottles per person per year, which is more than a case a month. What it doesn't account for is the fact that thousands of non-citizens work and live inside the Vatican walls. And on top of that, the city-state receives around 30 million pilgrims and tourists each year, and even more so now following the recent passing of Pope Francis. So many of those visitors attend masses and dine in Vatican cafes. So that high per capita figure is more of a sort of statistical fluke than evidence of divine overindulgence.
Right. And as you mentioned in your article, over 96% of the wine consumed in the Vatican City is Italian wine. Kind of why is that? And do you have a sense of where that wine is going in terms of, obviously there has to be sacramental wine, there's a place to grab a glass of wine at the Vatican Museum. So there's, some cafes, but that's a high percentage of Italian wine. And I'm curious how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's partly practical, right? So the Vatican is, after all, an enclave inside of Rome, but it's also cultural as well. So Italian wine is so deeply tied to Catholicism, both historically and liturgically, that it's kind of hard to imagine it being otherwise. I mean, you mentioned some of the stats there, and still wines make up about 2/3 of imports. So from your humble table wines to your structured Barolos, sparkling wines account for the rest. So Prosecco and Acqui and in terms of the context of where these wines are drunk, the sparkling wines are saved for sort of papal reception and diplomatic events and clergy dinners. And then, as you said, there's the more sacred stuff, so sacramental wines. And I mean, these are still wines, but often fortified, like Marsala from Sicily. In fact, last year, I think over 70% of imports were fortified. So that's obviously a clear nod to the church's liturgical needs. And the Vatican quite precise about, or particularly about the kind of wine that it wants. There's a thing called canon law, which states that wine used for the Eucharist in worship, it must be natural, made from grapes of the vine and not fruit, which I guess is pretty much the standard we should all try to apply to our own wine drinking. But as I said, if I commonly use wine to fortify, like Marsala, not only because of the theological symbolism, so, red being the blood of Christ and that kind of thing, but because they're shelf stable as well, so they travel really well. It's important to remember that mass is being said in dozens of chapels across Vatican City every day. So you want wines that are convenient in that sense, that do travel well and are not going to be spoiled.
Right. And you mentioned it's mostly bottled wine, right?
That's right. Yes, it's mostly bottled wine. So literally just transported over the cobblestone from Rome to Vatican, so it's ready to be drunk.
Right. I guess it also the Vatican City benefits from a special duty-free tax-exempt status as well.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's another sort of peculiar quirk of the world of wine in the Vatican. So there's a 1929 Lateran treaty that makes everything sort of duty free. So the Vatican, yeah, it's a tax haven essentially as far as wine is concerned. And in terms of how consumers or the Vatican itself sort of benefit from that, there are two main wine selling shops inside the Vatican. The more famous is the Annona store. So that's sort of the more famous gift store. It's open to anyone who crosses the city wall with, passport not required. The other is a sort of, I don't know, what's the supermarket in America? Costco, Walmart?
Yeah.
I think what this is an American audience. There's still a very enthusiastical Walmart.
Okay.
And or it's tucked into an old railway station and
Wow.
open only to those with a membership card. So it's like a typical priority club. So you got those
Get
two shops
out.
there.
Can a tourist go to that papal Walmart Costco?
And that one, so they can go to the Annona store and
I see.
in fact, you get many Romans regularly sort of popping over for cheaper wine, no custom paperwork needed.
Really?
So,
Yeah.
but there's a really slight paradox because, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into about how producers get their wine into the Vatican, but it's actually harder to get wine into the Vatican as a producer than it is to walk out with it as a consumer.
Wow. Wow. So from a kind of security perspective, getting the wine in?
Um, there's a small amount of wine that, I mean, it's highly competitive. So
Right.
and notoriously difficult. The Vatican doesn't sort of publish the wine list. You can, in theory, as a producer, apply through the Vatican's public procurement program, the Bande Pubblici Santa Fede. But the insiders will tell you that it's not about paperwork. It's kind of about who you know. And when that someone retires, as one Barolo producer told a colleague of mine, Louis Thomas, that deal tends to disappear with them. In fact, I
Huh.
mentioned Louis, because he wrote a more recent article on this subject matter, and some of what I'll be discussing in this episode was discovered by him. So shout out to Louis as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of what did he dig into in his piece?
Several producers, and he told me that, and he said it so in his article that if you ask the producer or even mention that you're researching vats of wine sales, they'll reply to you, "Oh, do you know anyone who can get it in?" So, I mean, it's quite rare for a wine journalist to
Wow.
find themselves on the end of a sales pitch. It's a nice role reversal there.
Right. So I guess producers must get a significant bump with the Papal Association, or it's just a prestige thing potentially.
It's more of a prestige thing, so that there's no sort of papal sticker saying "as seen in the Sistine Chapel," but there is an undeniable sense of sort of prestige. As you say, it's not a marketing bonanza. In fact, many producers are expressly forbidden from discussing their Vatican sales, but hopefully, within Italy especially, supplying the Holy See carries an enormous symbolic weight. I mean, Catholicism is still a powerful cultural force there, even if mass attendance is declining. Having your wine on a Vatican table or on the altar is a point of quiet, reverent pride, I guess.
Right. Wow. You mentioned in your article there's a Rioja that gets into the Vatican. And I would imagine that is potentially served in the Vatican cafeteria or at this store that you mentioned. I'm curious how that came to be. I'm sure they didn't tell you, but it's kind of interesting.
Again, yeah, they didn't really discuss, yeah, how non-Italian wines sort of find their way in. I think some of it may be to do with the Pope's actual preference and stuff. So it'd be interesting to see if there's a very minor influx of US wine
Right.
within the recent election. I know that champagne is often used as well. Again, we're talking more formal diplomatic settings as opposed to consumer-facing storefront, and that would be rerouted via EU export channels. But
Right.
that Rioja label in particular, I'm not 100% sure why it's held part of the overall makeup of the Vatican cellar.
Was there anything else that kind of stuck out to you as you were researching the kind of the business of wine at the Vatican? Anything that surprised you? I mean, obviously you report and write quite a bit about the wine industry, the business of wine, and was there anything kind of especially unusual that you came across while reporting this story?
I mean, I mean, I guess the whole thing is unusual. It was a per capita stat that was the sort of grabby headline
Right.
that, as I said, was a bit misleading. But I think that more broadly, it's just interesting how entwined wine is with the Vatican, both as sort of a practical tool and a potent symbol. It's poured over lunch by exhausted museum staff, and yet it's also shared between diplomats and sits in the Copa Summer Gardens and this sort of thing. So I think that's sort of what I talked about when I mentioned it's honorific environment, and that sounds really sort of healing to a wine enthusiast. But yeah, I guess there's just so much more to it, and the fact that there are laws written about the way that wines could be made in terms of sacramental wine and how it's used in worship, all the way to selling that very product in duty-free stores. It really is this all-encompassing thing, and I think these are the stories that draw us into the world of wine beyond the liquid in the bottle. And the fact that the Vatican now has a vineyard is it's sort of amplified that thing to a whole new level. So in terms of surprises, the numbers are kind of staggering, really. More wine drunk per capita than anywhere else in the world, and it's almost like an amusing
It's a little shocking.
little factoid to tell
Yeah.
to tell people like at a bar or whatever. But then if you really delve into it, the whole thing just becomes kind of fascinating. And I get it. I mean, talking about 3% being in court being Austrian wine and a Rioja label sort of sneaking in through the back door and that kind of thing. It's all shrouded in mystery, and it gets a bit sort of conclave and Dan Brown. And that sort of adds to it as well. The fact that producers who lend their wines to the Vatican are sort of sworn to secrecy,
Right.
or producers come to us. In the case of Louis, when he was writing these, asked me if we knew anyone who could get them into the Vatican and that kind of thing, who could help them get their wines into the Vatican. So there was just a litany of surprises, I guess, which is why sort of a fascinating topic, I suppose.
I've just had this crazy idea, and there might not be a connection at all, but thinking about how, how like the British royal family, the monarchy, there's like, certain sparkling wines that have the certain crown. I don't know what I'm talking about, by the way, but I feel like there's certain products, food and wine, that have kind of the crown seal of approval, and that's a very highly coveted thing.
Yes, yeah, it's they're royal warrants.
Right,
So
right,
they're granted by the king, formerly the queen, although Prince Charles was also able to grant them when Elizabeth II was alive. And yes, so Barry Brothers, for instance, has a royal warrant.
right,
So yeah, I guess that's a very prestigious seal of approval, and it's something we often report on when they're announced
right.
at the beginning of the
I
year.
imagine it
Sort of like knighthood
yeah,
for
knighthood.
food and drink.
I would imagine that would have a significant, I mean, aside from the prestige factor, you would get the bump in sales.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, there's and also the lose one as well. Like,
Oh, people
sort of
lose
massive
them?
thing. Yeah, you can. Yeah, they're just not included in the list of royal warrant. I mean, I think it's quite rare. This
Wow.
is very much sort of off my head, but yeah, it can happen. But no, I can certainly see why he made that comparison, that link. Yeah, for sure.
As an American, it is hard to imagine any kind of equivalent here, whether it be like a federally run vineyard or a special, like, this is a good wine, says the president stamp. It's like so foreign.
Trump has vineyards, does he not?
Yeah, yeah, actually,
President Trump has
I think
vineyards,
he
does he
does
not?
actually. I think he does. I think, yes. We're in new territory with that, but yes, I think you're actually right. So it's such an interesting topic. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on and chatting about it with me. It will be interesting to see if Pope Leo says, "Hey, I like my Napa cabs. Could we have some of those in the cafeteria?" But it's like you're going to
Yeah.
Italy. I mean, what an amazing, amazing place to work, I would imagine. But yeah, we'll never really, really know what it's like. I imagine if I reach out to a Vatican rep and ask, "What are you serving at lunch today?" Probably won't get an answer. I would love to know.
Possibly not. Possibly not. I mean, there's only one way to find out.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, James, for coming on and for all of your reporting on this topic. It's lovely to meet you and chat with you.
Oh, likewise. No, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
With the Vatican's recent planting of a small plot of Cabernet Sauvignon at Castel Gandolfo, the Pope's involvement in the wine world will only continue to grow. It remains to be seen whether anyone outside the Holy See will ever get to taste these wines, which are expected to be ready in 2026. You can email us your comments and questions at podcast@wineenthusiast.com. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite shows. You can also go to wineenthusiast.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm Maria Yagoda, and thanks for listening.